everyone. My name is David McLeod. I am your life mastery coach and one of the co-hosts of this program, Soul Empowerment. Today, we are going to have a really, really interesting conversation on the idea of manipulation with the question, who's really manipulating you? I'd like to start by introducing my guest hosts. First, I'm going to go with you, Sarah. Say hello. Tell us who you are, where you are, what you do, and why.
I'm Sarah Jane. I'm in the UK. What do? I work with energy. I run a TV channel. I channel from sound to mythical beings to dragons to light language, and I do it because I love it.
Now that was succinct. Thank you. Scott, how about you? Who you are, where you are, what you do, and why?
I'm still trying to figure out the why, but I'm in Boston and a quantum intuitive healer and using a bunch of different modalities that I learn, and I keep learning. I'm a lifelong student, which is a wonderful thing. I learn those modalities for me, and I pass that knowledge on to the people that I work with, that I deal with, and that I give my time to. I want, much like everyone that's been on this program, Gail included, is to see the healing for people, to be able to see themselves for who they are. And that's a wonderful thing.
Right. Yeah, beautiful. And thank you for mentioning. Gail, unfortunately, is not able to join us today. She has some kind of family issues going on. She's also feeling sick physically. So I'd just like for us to send out some loving, healing energy in her direction and wish her the very best. And I know that she'll be back next month for our next episode, whatever that's going to be. But anyway, this whole topic of manipulation actually came up during our planning session. And I think that Sarah and I were the only ones there. And I can't remember exactly how it came up, but it seems like the question of manipulation, the one question that came to my mind was, well, the truth is, I don't think anybody has the power to affect how I feel or what I think or any of those things. So really, when I am being manipulated, so to speak, am I actually being manipulated by some external force, or is it something within me that's allowing manipulation to happen? And I think that's where the question came up, and we dove into it for a little while. We had some pretty interesting conversation about it, and we decided this would be a great topic. So that's where it came from. And I don't know, Scott, you weren't there, so this is probably a little bit new to you. I know you've read the write-up and you're ready to go, but what does it mean for you? What is manipulation for you, and how does it show up in your life?
I thought long and hard about this, and I realized I think we're all kind of conditioned, as you had written, conditioned by our upbringing, by our parents, by our family, by how we grew up, and a very demanding father, and my mother did everything. So she showed me that you could do everything, and she did everything for the family, but she had very high expectations. And so, being the oldest of the family, I, of course, was tasked with the highest goal, the bar, to be able to set the example, but also to be able to jump over. And it really brought for me perfectionist. Perfectionist. I don't know if any of those people out there listening have that little guy that sits on the shoulder and says, no, can't. If you can't do it perfectly, you shouldn't do it. If there's one thing out of alignment, if there's one thing that's off, don't do it. Don't step, because it's not going to be perfect. And that really manipulated my teenage years in staying within the rules, that my early adult years of what I should do, how I should do it, the role I should play, and the demands that I put on other people, by the way, which affected my relationships with my wife, my kids, with those people around me, because my standards were very exacting, not only for myself, but everybody around me. My daughters told me, Dad, you always had higher expectations of us than you did of anybody else. And that was really hard. That was hard for me to hear when I was, of course, when they're in their 20s and they're kind of feeling their way through it. I never thought I did, but yep, that was me.
Well, you know what? Hang on, Scott. Hang on.
Yep.
Setting high standards for your kids is not a bad thing, is it?
No, but when they are exaggeratedly high, when they
Okay, so give me an example of something that's exaggeratedly high.
With them, especially in school, my wife being a teacher, so therefore, straight A's was kind of that expectations, that anything less meant that you didn't do your homework, you didn't work well. When they get into high school, of course, their whole thing was, well, the teacher doesn't like me, or I don't like the teacher, which we never allowed to be an excuse. So there was that push to get better, higher. Yes, there isn't anything wrong with it, but when it covers all aspects of life, my wife was the ultimate rule follower. Later in life, I realized that as a rebel teenager, living well into his 40s, that I tried to break some of the rules, and there was always that constant fight within myself, but within our relationship. So no, it isn't bad that we try to set those standards. However, expectation and living up to them gets really, really tough if you've lived in a household like that. And so what I've come to say is, look, I'm a 95 percenter. What? So when you're getting graded, if you're not getting 100 or 105%, if you get a 95, you still get a strong A, right? You're still doing it. You're still doing it well, but you leave a margin for error. And that 5% margin of error, which because we're human happens, it allows you to step forward, knowing that stuff's going to go wrong. Let's do this program. Talk about the program where things technically beyond our control go wrong, and we have to deal with them. So it isn't perfect, but that doesn't mean we stop doing what we're doing. We just go on with it and do the best we can. And that's where the manipulation has stopped for me within my ego mind of saying, you have to do this, you have to do it perfectly, or you can't go forward.
That's a great point. I remember my stepfather saying to me, don't shoot for perfection, because then there's no room for improvement. So that was one little piece of advice that he gave me that actually stuck it, although I've forgotten about it until you mentioned that being a 95 percenter, but I can resonate with that. So Sarah, what do you think about all this?
Oh, I was so strict with myself because of everything that went on in my life. And a perfectionist, everything. But I was considerably more thoughtful to other people. We're all human. We all make mistakes. And that I was able to accept of others, but I was never able to accept it of myself. My parents had a small hotel when sort of I was a lot younger. And it was, the table had to be laid perfectly, knives and forks in the right place, etc., etc. And okay, it was a business. It was how mum earned some money because dad was still out working full time. But obviously if things went wrong in the hotel, that didn't particularly help. But I think the perfectionism for me was purely about the feeling rejected, abandoned, unwanted, unloved, not good enough. And therefore, I've got to be as perfect as possible, with the hope that they'll like me. It wasn't even really with the hope that they'll love me, that it's the hope that I might be accepted for something. So sort of my reasoning for doing everything. But I was no good at school. I really wasn't any good at school. Sort of English language. I failed that the first time in sort of what we called O levels at the time. They're now called GCSEs or whatever they've changed it to since, because it was so many years ago. I actually think I failed maths, and I just about scraped through on a CSE, which was a level below O level. Sort of, I wasn't that good at school. My reading has never been brilliant. And, sort of it's listening actually to my youngest sister and what she's had to say about the fact she's been diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. And she sort of said, Sarah, I never could get the hang of English grammar. So that's the reason I've never been able to learn a foreign language, because they teach it through grammar. Why can't they teach you to speak it the way we learn to speak English? Sort of. So I'm obviously not teachable the way they can teach the majority of people. So there is obviously a different wiring. But of course, that didn't help me. I have been really good at things once I got the hang of them. Our maths teacher was a brilliant mathematician, but a lousy teacher. When I went to college and did day release from the job I was doing, and did the general certificate of distribution and the national distribution certificate, the calcs and accounts teacher was able to help me to learn to do mental arithmetic. And it was just so easy. It stuck, and I'm still able to use it. But it's how we are taught, and we don't all learn the same way. Isn't there that lovely cartoon which has got a goldfish in a goldfish bowl, an elephant and a monkey and something else? And if we're all judged on our ability to climb a tree,
That's right. Yeah.
I think we are all uniquely different. And
well, I think by definition, if you're different, you have to be unique.
Yeah. Yes. Well, yes. So I think the manipulation in my life really started with the system manipulating circumstances around and that those circumstances were exacerbated by the system's manipulation of your parents can only come and see you for an hour once every other day, the reality being once a week. All of those things, that's a system manipulation. That's not a people manipulation. And so there are different types of manipulation that can very adversely affect our younger selves.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with this entirely. And it's interesting now that you both have shared something about your upbringing. I feel compelled to share something about mine. So this is something I haven't really talked about very much. I've shared a lot of stuff about my life in my books and my chapters and stuff. But there was one aspect that I've never really talked about, and that is this idea of perfectionism. I mean, as it turns out, I'm actually a really smart guy. I don't like to brag about it, but it's just the truth, and I might as well embrace it. But when I was in my late teens, I guess, before I went and joined the military, I was a complete rebel. I was not going to let them tell me what kind of grades I should get. And so I slacked off, in school. I really did. I managed to coast through with like a 75 average. I did the same thing in college, in military college. I did enough to get the grades so that I could keep going and become a fighter pilot. That was my objective. I didn't care about school. I didn't care about education. Most of what I learned there was, it was easy for me. It was easy. And so, 75% average was enough for me to get through and achieve the goals that I wanted to achieve. But then after I left the military and started looking into what I wanted to do with my life, computers became a big thing for me. And eventually I decided I'm going back to university. No one told me to do this. No one told me I had to get good grades. No one said anything. I just applied. I said, this is what I want to do. And I want to get a master's degree in computer science. So I went and I started getting aces all the way through. You know, they had a 9-point grading system, and I was at the 9 level on virtually every course I took. And so when I finished my master's degree, they asked me if I wanted to continue in a PhD program. They invited me. And I said, of course, I love the ego stroke. So I said yes. And so I started taking more courses, you know, the advanced graduate courses, and I was acing those ones too. So what I realized is I have the potential within myself to do whatever I choose to do. The thing was, I think on a subconscious level, I sensed the manipulation, the idea, hey, you're a smart guy, you have to get straight A's. Well, I'm a smart guy and screw you. That was the kind of attitude I took about it. I'm going to decide for myself. So I think we all had our own experience of being manipulated, and all of us, I think, were given the same kind of ultimatum. You got to get straight A's. But we, each of us, responded to that in different ways. So we all got manipulated on some level, and we all chose how we were going to respond to that manipulation. In my case, I really didn't recognize it as manipulation. I wouldn't have talked about it in that way. But I certainly now, today, I see, yeah, as I listen to you talk, oh yeah, conditioning from this, conditioning from that, absolutely. So I agree with you 100%, Sarah. Each of us, when we're young children, we are manipulated by our parents, by our caregivers, by our teachers, by our society, by our ministers and priests that happen if we happen to go to church, by all the other officials and authorities that are in our world. And then on top of that, we get manipulated by the very television shows that we like to watch. You know, the advertising that they put on there, or the radio stations. Hey, you got to buy this, you got to have that if you want to keep up with the Joneses and blah, blah, blah. It's all manipulation. And many of us fall for it. Many of us do. Now, I'm going to reverse the question now. I would like to know what techniques you use to try and manipulate other people. Now we're going to get down into the nitty-gritty. And I know I'll speak for myself.
That is not a fair question.
I will begin. I have engaged in passive aggressive behavior in my lifetime, where I maybe just simply refuse to internally. I stop talking to somebody, or I will shut down rather than expressing what I'm disappointed about or whatever. And I'm secretly hoping that the other person will kind of figure out what the problem is and solve it. That's one of the ways that I have shown up in my life. And of course, now, I mean, that was years ago, but I recognized at some point, this doesn't work. What am I doing? I'm trying to manipulate someone by using reverse psychology and twisting things around. And what good is that? So that's okay. That's just one. Who wants to go next?
I'm very open about this. I preferably try not to. But then over the past couple of years, there's been couple of years, every now and again, something happens. And I feel I'm really being pushed, and it's huge. Whoops. And it's usually by the system. And it was actually at the beginning of this year. And sort of I was receiving some benefits, and there was a real issue around the fact that somebody pressed a button they shouldn't have done, which stopped my benefits. And it meant I had to go on to something new, which was going to cause me so much more work when I'm trying to do everything I'm trying to do anyway. And
right.
I have absolutely no problem with turning the waterworks on.
Right? Does that work for you?
Oh, well, let's put it this way. When you're talking about the system, okay, you start getting angry or sarcastic, it will not work. You'll get kicked out and you won't get anything. So you've got to play the game. And the game doesn't work if you're angry and start getting sarcastic. But
Hey,
if it's
he's back. Scott's back. Good.
and and so it was really a matter of, but this is an error on their part. And it was just like, so I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to turn the water walks on. If you aren't going to listen to common sense and be able to put the system right so that it stops adversely affecting me. Now, I ended up with compensation for what they did. But if I'd gone the angry, sarcastic route, I could have got kicked out and got absolutely nothing, which would have really put me in financial problems for sort of for 3 months, well, 4 months, until such time as I started receiving my pension. This was the ridiculous part. They did it when there was literally 3 months to go before I got my pension. And it was so stupid. And I just thought, do you know what? I'm not having this. I am going to make you lot pay. And I did, because I will not, because of the manipulation they were trying to cause of me, I pushed back. But I pushed back in a way that left them feeling they had to help me, rather than them, well, they were still pushing me around, but not to the same extent. So if we have a tool that we can use that supports us to get through the system that is trying to manipulate us, why not use it? And I have that tool, so I do use it.
Well, I'm going to come back to that story in a minute, but I want to give Scott a chance to share
How do
a
we use
way
it?
in which you manipulate other people, or that you have done in the past.
So in doing that, we have in my daytime job, my 40-hour job, we have a union. And for those of any of you who've dealt with unions, you know that there is a tool there, and that is so that you aren't manipulated by the system. And most people don't ask for help, and most people just try to deal with it on their own, which is sad. But there's a manipulation, Sarah, that in much the same way. I used to use, I used to have an internal character called the judge. And the judge was the one that upheld those very high standards that I held myself to, but also everybody else. Yep. And so if you didn't live up to it, then you were kind of left out. So what I did, I had a three strike premise that I was always taught when in management, right? I was always in charge of people. I was in sales. So, and manipulation was one of those things I was taught, but never used in sales, only because I didn't think it was right. That when you have a sale, when you're doing and going back and forth with people, there had to be a sense of win-win instead of manipulation. Oh, geez, you got me. Okay. Not a used car dealer. I was in sales on the road for 30 years. But the manipulation for me was that judge. It was keeping everything at a very high standard. And if you didn't live up to that, that's when the hammer came down. And that's really the thing that I used in dealing with people. It made me a bit aloof at times. It made me hated. One of the jobs that I was in, that was they were disassembling their American operations, and they called me the hatchet man because I was the one that had to let everybody go. I probably ended up losing more sleep over this than anybody else that ended up going through this process. But that consciousness of being right all the time wears on you. It takes a heavy toll, and no more. I gave up having to be right. in that
Well, that's
aspect.
good. You know, this idea of manipulation, as I'm hearing us talk about this, if I ever engage in any form of manipulation, it's because there's something I want that I'm not getting. You know, there's something that I want that I'm not getting. And when I asked the question, I was thinking more in terms of our relationships rather than dealing with the system. And you know, I think of times in marriages and in other relationships where ultimately the biggest form of manipulation that I'm aware of is the withholding of love. It is that's, you know, love is held out as a carrot on the end of a stick, you know, and if you behave appropriately, you get some of that love. And if you don't, then the thing is pulled away and you get the other end of it, you know, you get the stick instead. Uh, of course, we're talking about conditional love here, but that is one form of manipulation. So when I was talking about passive aggressiveness, that's effectively what it is. You know, I have this anger, this upset that's going on within me, and I'm so worried that my anger is going to scare you away that I'm afraid to tell you that I'm angry, and instead I just pretend everything's okay and hide out until you can figure it out. You know, meanwhile, I'm not fully present. My entire being has kind of faded into the background. And, you know, if you talk to me, I'll just kind of, yeah, okay, whatever. You know, that's the kind of conversation you get from me when I'm in that state. And what is that? Well, that's my ego mind trying to protect me from something that it perceives as a danger, you know? And I suspect that that's the same for most people. You know, when we just sit and be with it, I'm not going to judge myself because I've been passive aggressive in my life. You know, I'm not going to judge myself because I have withheld love. You know, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be compassionate with myself and say, yeah, I did that. And what did it get me? What was the real benefit that it got me? I ended up being alone. I ended up suffering anyway, you know, thinking that I was doing the inflicting of damage on someone else. I was actually hurting myself. My ego mind was dead wrong. When I am able to do that kind of introspection and come to that understanding, then I can say, all right, so if something is hurting inside and I feel like I'm not getting what I want, what is the right way to deal with it? Well, obviously withholding isn't going to help. So maybe giving it, saying, hey, I'm upset about this and I think I'd like to talk about it. Are you open to hearing it? You know, we can change if we choose. So, and what I've also found by doing that is, you know, people don't like conflict. People generally shy away from that sort of thing, but they much rather have straight up in your face kind of conflict than the kind that's behind your back and around the corner and down the street somewhere. You know, people would rather deal with it right up front and let's get it over with. That's been my experience. So what do you folks say about that?
I'm just thinking about those people who create their own self-fulfilling prophecies. You know, especially with when you've experienced what you thought was rejection, and then you just go into that phase of, and it's, for me, I never expected relationships to last. The relationship with my parents didn't, because of what happened with a baby. I had a younger sister that died, you know, sort of, and it was just like everything just had fallen apart in my life, and that really impacted me. So with boyfriends, it didn't work. Friendships, you know, sort of friends from school and whatever, they just don't exist for me, because it's relationships just don't last. First marriage gone, second marriage gone. And okay, I suppose I can see it in my second marriage more than my first marriage. You know, sort of suddenly I got a job I loved. I was in, you know, happy in my marriage. And then I got made redundant from this job I loved. And it was that trigger that, right, now your life's going to fall to pieces. Only I, you know, but
Right.
yes, but I didn't understand that at the time. And suddenly my whole attitude went into creating that self-fulfilling prophecy that the marriage would end. not actually helped by the fact and understanding now that when we did eventually get married, because we were together for 11 years, but only married for 3.5, he actually went, as soon as we got married, he actually went into copying how his father had been with his mother, which was barely speaking to her.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas he and I'd always had conversations, we'd talk over meals or whatever. Suddenly there were just no conversations. I'd ask him a question, and 10 minutes later, it's like, "Oh, did you say something?" And it's just like, whoa, that happened too many times, and it doesn't take many for you to start realizing something's not right. And eventually, when I did eventually end up, but his mother said to my mother, she speaks to those cats better than she speaks to him. So I had gone into a mode of creating the self-fulfilling prophecy. And so, yes, that's a form of manipulation without even realizing that's what you're doing. But when I ended up by sitting him down and saying, the marriage is over, his comment was, but I've got everything I ever wanted, and that includes you. And I thought, I'm not a thing. So I think
Right. Yeah.
we do manipulate. We don't necessarily know we are doing it, but if you've got an aspect within you that creates self-fulfilling prophecies, that is just going to something that's going to kick in with a trigger.
I have a funny feeling that most people would prefer to see themselves as non-manipulative, non-judgmental beings, even though we have this ego mind that is very manipulative and very judgmental most of the time.
Yeah.
And by the way, I will say this, in spite of all the work I've done, I still have an ego mind, and it still likes to manipulate and judge. So I have to work on that. Scott, what did you want to say about this?
Well, in hearing your past experiences, what you're saying is I shouldn't get married again. So
No shoulds. You can do what you want to do.
Absolutely.
no should. I know. And the reason I bring that up, I'm going to be retiring shortly, and I'm looking. Actually, I asked my girlfriend to get married
Oh, nice.
before I retire, which is I never thought I'd be there, by the way.
How
So
about
it's
that? We have
interesting.
an announcement of marriage
You have
on
announced.
soul empowerment.
Has she accepted is more to the point.
Yeah. We've been together for about 7 years, and I told her initially there's no way I wanted to get married again, and she was okay with that. But I've come to see it as just it's okay now, and that's because of the work that I've done.
Right.
Fear, and the reason I bring this up is fear. You want to talk about manipulation? Okay, fear has always been that thing that made me stop. My mind would get into the 75 things that were going to go wrong or happen. All of them bad, by the way. None of the outcomes were positive in my mind. And so fear of, well, what would they do? Whoever they were that we grew up with, thinking that in school as a 6, 7, 8-year-old that there was this master book that people put everything we did wrong in, the big book, and that that's how we were judged. That's what I learned in church. You have all these things added up, and so therefore, if you were bad, it would all come out. But it's that fear, and that fear of being wrong, that fear of not being good enough, that fear of not accomplishing what the expectations that I put on myself that were unrealistic. That fear of just not getting where I needed to be. And that fear in me really kind of changed the course of my decisions. when my youngest daughter got sick, and at the time I was 25 years old, and we almost lost her, and then she was multiply handicapped um, from the brain damage. The fear changed. The fear changed, and it was, how can I make every day the best that I possibly could for my daughter and for my family? And that was overriding for 20 years. That was 15 years. That was overriding everything that I thought about, did, decisions I made, is that, and that fear was manipulative.
Of course.
In grieving and going past that, it was about, I never thought I did well enough. And that being able to forgive myself, to love myself, to be able to know that I did the best I could with what I had in that time. Hindsight being 2020 always. And so the manipulation of myself came with and changed through acceptance of who I was.
Right.
That acceptance of love, that acceptance of I am human, and the unrealistic expectations just didn't work anymore. And if I was going to live a really good life, I had to allow myself at least that 5% of error.
Well, the idea that fear is the ultimate manipulator, I think is really what you're saying here. And that coincides precisely with what I was talking about with the ego mind, because the ego mind lives within fear. Everything that the ego mind does is to mitigate fear. And as Sarah pointed out in the comments or in the chat there, false evidence appearing real. Well, I don't know that that's actually true. It's a great backronym, and it's useful for helping us to remember stuff. But some evidence that you see is very real, and it provides good reason for avoiding something. Let's face it. If you're about to cross the street and a bus is barreling down on you, that's probably a good idea to jump out of the way, unless you want to terminate your physical existence on this planet. So sometimes fear has a very legitimate purpose, and I don't think we should dismiss it all just out of hand. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But I wanted to also say that, you talked about how you kind of overcame that manipulation, and it was through the power of self-love and self-compassion. And I think that's something that we can all do. There's nothing wrong with having an ego mind. Your ego mind is a very useful tool to help you navigate your way around this physical plane. However, if your ego mind is running the show, it's almost always based upon something based on fear, right? Whereas if you allow yourself to drop down out of your ego mind and down into your heart and into your soul, now you can get more connected to that place of unconditional love and let yourself be driven by that instead. And then everything around the world looks different, right? It's not necessarily an easy journey to go from here down to here. Some people say it's the longest journey of all. And I think I tend to agree with that, because that ego mind ain't going to shut up. It's not going to stop. You have to find a way to love your ego mind into serenity, into silence, into calmness. And when you do that, that allows you then to ease your way into your heart and soul. So, yeah, I love what everybody's saying here. And this idea of when we ask the question, who's really manipulating you? I think, Scott, you kind of answered it by using the word fear. Fear is the ultimate manipulator. And it manifests, as I say, as the ego mind. So the question is, when I get into that state of manipulating someone else, what am I really doing? I think, based on what we've said here so far, a summary would be, I'm allowing my fear to drive certain behaviors and decisions and thinking patterns, which then affects the way I show up in front of other people. Does that sound reasonable to everybody?
It does, except the fact I knew exactly what I was doing, and there was no fear based in what I was doing earlier this year.
Oh, yes, there was. There was fear-based. You were afraid you were going to lose your benefits.
Yes and no, because not knowing how the system worked, because there was a change in the way they were doing things, but it was just a matter of work from honesty. And okay, the tears weren't necessarily honest, to be perfectly honest, but they wouldn't listen to the common sense of what was being said and the truth of what was being said, which was their error, not mine, and an error they couldn't put right. And that's the system thing. But I think going back to this fear thing, I was raised a Catholic. I went to a Catholic school, sort of, and that really is about control through fear.
That's right. Through fear, exactly right.
And it really is. And I eventually, remember sitting after reading Conversations with God. I was going to church at the time, some wonderful, lovely people there. But I was sitting in there, I was thinking, they were listening to the sermon, and I was thinking, you've got it, you lost it. And they'd make one comment at the end of the sermon that totally wiped out everything they'd said prior to.
Right.
And I got to the point, I said, Sarah, what are you doing? There are some lovely people here, yes, there are. But why are you still going to church?
Mm-hmm.
You have a belief, but it goes way beyond what's being taught here.
Right.
And so can we step out of those situations? And for me, that was very much definitely going to church, that are manipulating us. That's our choice. By being raised a Catholic, within the family I was in, there was no teaching about loving yourself. But once I was able to do that, to learn to do that, and realize that was absolutely okay, and in fact essential to do, my life has changed enormously. And
Right.
I really do try and stay out of judgment. I really do try not to manipulate, because it is about each and every person having choice.
Well, we lost Scott again, unfortunately.
He'll be back. He still seems to be here, but just not on camera. So I think, isn't it? It's our reactions to things, and then the energies that we put into those reactions.
Scott, you still there? I don't know if he can hear me or not. Oh, he's just dropped off. Well, Scott was talking earlier about, the checklist, the book of life or whatever, and saying something like, well, if you meet all these things, then, you pass into the next level, otherwise you don't. And I'm thinking what you were talking about with the Catholic Church, and not only the Catholic Church, but the Anglican Church as well, and maybe other religions too. It didn't matter whether you passed or not, because we have this concept of original sin. You are stuck with that no matter what. It doesn't matter what good deeds you do. That is not going to get you back into heaven. That's the teaching of the religion. And for me, that meant, so to hell with it. I'm doomed regardless, unless I bow the knee and bend down to their belief system and basically submit myself to something that somebody else made up. That just felt completely wrong to me. And so I had exactly the same experience, Sarah. I kind of left the church, and I decided to look for my answers elsewhere. And I discovered that the only real answers I've ever found came from in here, came from within. They never came from any book or any teaching from outside of myself. They never came from any amazing avatar, although some of those people did point in the right direction and some of their teachings were very valid. But ultimately, the truth has to come from within. Is that something that's been true for you?
100% the truth has to come from within. But reading Conversations with God, Neil Donald Walsh, seriously, there were things in that caught me in the core of my being.
Right.
Absolutely said truth. And actually reading Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code.
Mm-hmm.
And when he talked in there about Jesus being married to Mary Magdalene, and it was just, that was another thing that caught me right in the core of my being, and the truth of that, which would not be accepted within the Catholic Church.
Of course not. Well, and the thing is, you're talking about something that I think is really important, and that is, how do we recognize truth? You know, and you said it hit you in the core of your being, or it caught you in the core of your being, I think is what you said. And I'm thinking, I know that feeling. That is, to me, that is as Neil Donald Walsh would say, the ring of truth. That is the resonance that happens. You know something is true the moment you feel it in your body. You know, you don't need someone to say this is true and that's not true. You know.
Yeah.
And that comes from within, right? So even though the information, the idea, the concept, the belief, the thought, whatever, might have been sourced from some other place that appears to be outside, ultimately it's that ring of truth that happens inside that helps you to know.
Yeah, 100%. And it helps you to step out of the manipulation of a system, of people, of whatever. And it is very much about that support of self. And of course,
Right.
it hits you in the core of your being rather than in here.
Exactly right.
That is when you are right there in that, sort of that place that is, if you like, it's actually your heart's connection to your soul, your heart's connection to the belief, the truth. Now, okay, that's a truth for me. It may not be a truth for others, but it is absolutely a truth for me. And if other people don't feel it as their truth, that is absolutely their life journey, their path. And I'm not here to tell you what you've got to believe. That's your choice.
Well, now that's another interesting point that you're bringing up. And I actually believe that there is such a thing as absolute truth. That's true for everybody, everywhere, all things, and so on. However, most of us are living our lives and we have a very limited perspective capabilities. We have filters, we have all kinds of things that are going on. And so when we see something that might generally be considered to be absolute truth, we're looking at it through our own filters. And so we might not recognize it immediately as absolute truth. It might take a while for it to sink in. I always think of that story of the 5 blind men who are asked to describe an elephant, but they're all taken to different parts of the elephant, and each one is describing the truth, but his words are different from his words, and it may sound like they might even sound contradictory. If you got the tail, you might say, oh, an elephant is like a piece of rope with the rough edge. Or somebody got the trunk, you might say an elephant is a smooth tube with holes in the end. That's, they might both be true and yet sound contradictory. So it's really important to understand that people have an experience of something in their heart of hearts, in their soul of souls. They will know the truth when they feel it. But if their mind gets in the way, which often happens, you may perceive it as being something other than truth. Scott, you're back. You might as well get some words in while you're still here.
So the matter of perspective, and that I think is where we are with manipulation. Matter of perspective. What you had said about, I've always used the characteristic, it's a million-mile journey from here to here, and it depends on where you're seeing all of this from. There are times, and we say this all the time, your heart can't ever be wrong, because if you're coming from a place of love, you can't be wrong. The outcome might not be what you actually want. It may look totally different, but it's usually not wrong. Whereas with your mind, as you pointed out many times, David, in so many ways, it changes, it corrupts, it changes your perspective. And it's the perspective of, I'm protecting you. I want you to do nothing that will harm you. And so, yes, we get to fear. We were talking about it before. And when you look at something like zip lining, or jumping out of an airplane with a perfectly good airplane with a parachute, or doing something, a roller coaster, and you see all these other people doing it, yet you have this trepidation, you have this fear. And I always look at it when I'm talking to myself. Well, if so many millions of people can do this, why is it that you can't? So I allow myself the experience. Don't always like the experience, but I allow the experience so that I can understand it. And that's what I think you were saying about perspective is, depending on where you are, depending on where you are at that moment. And we all have that sense from, depending on if we're 20, 30, 50, or 60, reading the same story.
Or 70 or 80.
Or 70 or 80, and having a much different perspective on that same story. The story hasn't changed, but how we view it has changed totally.
Right. It's interesting. You brought up some things that I just wanted to mention. It's not really apropos of anything, but I have noticed in my life, I have less fear about doing physical things that are physically dangerous than doing things that are emotionally dangerous. You know what I mean? Like the idea of flying an airplane, or hell, if I ever thought I was going to die in an airplane, I never would have gotten into one in the first place. Skiing down a hill, I'm never thinking about falling and hurting myself. I'm thinking about making it to the bottom of the hill. Or zip lining, it's or bungee jumping, or any of those things. I don't choose to do them or not do them because of fear. I choose because of interest or not, But on the other hand, you want me to share the deepest truth of my heart and just really be vulnerable? Whoa, baby. That is huge level fear for me. Way, way harder to do. It's not hard anymore, but it certainly was when I first started doing this personal growth work. I always thought, oh my God, these people are going to hate me. They're going to cast me out. I'm going to be exiled. They'll never want to talk to me ever again. I'll be alone for the rest of my life. That really is my ultimate fear, being all alone forever. And I found that very interesting, that I'd be willing to take physical risks, like in the snap of fingers, but a risk of the heart, wow. I don't know if other people feel that, but that's just been my truth.
I think it's a really difficult one, isn't it? Yeah, zip lining, great fun. Flying a helicopter, doing a wing walk. I've done those things because life is about experiencing. It absolutely is about experiencing. And no, I've done the 3 highest peaks in the UK, sort of Scotland, Wales, and England. I've sort of climbed those and got to the top and got back down again. It's just go out, enjoy yourself, do something fun. Would I do the wing walk again? No, but I am so pleased I've done it. The zip wire, that was fun. Sort of, it really was. Yeah, flying a helicopter was that. I only wanted to ride in a helicopter. I just got a lesson instead. So it's just like, so have fun in your life, but they haven't also got to be expensive things. I've always wanted to throw a pot and make a pot and pottery, and I've done that too. So we can do little things. Just give yourself. Doesn't matter whether you're any good at it. It's, are you good? If it's something you wish to experience, experience it. Don't let this tell you not to bother. Taking myself off to Egypt on my own to go and swim with dolphins, and I did eventually see them on the last day. So, but it's do it. Just do it.
Right. But you're not really answering the question. Did you find it harder to share your heart with people than to do something physically risky?
I never felt I had a heart.
Oh,
because
now that is a whole new conversation.
But seriously, sort of that not knowing who I was. So if you don't know who you are, how can you share yourself? You can't. So it was actually having the courage, the strength, once I realized that actually I've got to put paid to all the stuff that's going on in my life, which caused the end of the marriage, etc., etc. That wake up call that started the wake up of me, that triggered the wake up of me. And there wasn't a fear in that, because it was me that said, I wish to go to see a psychotherapist so I can understand why I have been the way I have been. In fact, I was all about being out there to learn about me. And I've always known my story, and I haven't had any problems with ever telling that. So I don't know whether it wasn't fear of being open in that, because, well, maybe it was. I had shut all that down when I was so young. Don't love, can't get hurt.
Yeah, got it. Scott, how about you?
Oh, yeah. Telling the story, and not thinking that anyone will accept you, or because of what you've done in your life experiences, that they will think ill of you, or they will shut you out, or they don't want to love you anymore. That is the ultimate fear, yes, of being ostracized, thrown out. And in writing, and we've all written, and I found that initially in writing, that my biggest fear wasn't that a million people would read it. My biggest fear was that my family and my friends would read it because they know me, and that they would see the parts of me that they might never have seen. And I had family after I wrote my first piece who called me, and they contacted me, and they said, we never knew. And it was just such a revelation, and it was such an acceptance. And out there listening, that if you really, really tell your story, the real story, as you saw it, as you felt it, as you experienced it, there will be more acceptance than there will be of rejection.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. I think all of us, we all have a story, but the truth is we are not the story. We are the experiencers of that story. And the more we share those experiences, the more we connect and create connection with other people. And that's the beauty of opening up to the truth of who you are. First of all, finding that truth, and then being willing to share that truth with everybody. It doesn't mean you have to be open and, open your, as we say, open the kimono every single moment. You don't have to reveal every single truth about yourself in every single moment. But one thing that I encourage people to do is not to be ashamed of your truth. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't run away from it. If someone asks and you feel that it's safe enough to share, then just share it openly without apology. they'll have their reaction. Chances are the reaction will be much more compassionate, loving, and forgiving than you can possibly imagine. So I think we've kind of covered this topic in vast coverage in a lot of different ways. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here. I just want to give each of you a chance to say any final words before I terminate the recording. Sarah, would you like to go first?
I'm going to do this in light language so that it's for people's heart and their soul. Nit tunakosh tunike, sernai tatatarakash toyata, sernoita an ante ake, shirnoita takatani amateki, nintana koi ai, steinai ni aktai, verhalono tormai kichi ia, ne a e achteki ni amata aromai. Bore ni ashtunake I nit noikai ha'a teramaka cheeta. Namaste.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Scott.
I never understand what you say, what you say, but I understand the feeling of it each and every time, and that's the marvel of it. Thank you. Allow your heart to guide you, and you won't feel the need to manipulate others. You will find a truth in the relationship and the connections that need to be, and those that don't need to be anymore, but also the connection to your ego self. Right. Be able to have that relationship within you to be whole, and therefore everything will find its place.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Sarah and Scott. Everybody, thank you for being here, and thank you for participating. If you want, you can pick up recordings of this and every other episode of Soul Empowerment on my website at yourlifemasterycoach.com. Until next time, my name is David McLeod, wishing you love, light, and blessings. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.